There we go. There we go. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another week of the Good Natured Hour. We had some really cool emails come in this past week. So quite a few of what the topics that we'll be covering tonight are courtesy of you all and maybe some of your friends. So with that, why don't you go ahead and get comfortable, and we are going to get going with tonight's. Let's see if I can get the screen share started here. And let's see. Let me. All right, enough of that. Probably the one of the only topics tonight that was not reader generated was the one here, which was the topic of last week's column, wool carder bees. And this is a species that I remember finding in my yard, gosh, probably close to 5 years ago, and wrote about them then, and then kind of brought the article back again this year because I found them again. Now, I've really tried to devote a lot of the garden space in my yard to native species, but I've still got a few things that are remnants from the old days, and also things that I kind of enjoy having around. And one of those is lamb's ears. And you can see here in this photo, this is a wool carder bee. It happens to be the male actually on the flower of the lamb's ears. And this is a bee that I came to know first, not so much by what it looked like, but by what it sounded like, what its behavior was, this buzz, buzz, buzz. I mean, this is a loud bee. And it turns out it's all part of its purpose and its presence in our gardens. The male wool carder bee, as we so often see with some of our solitary bees, the male's job is to kind of defend the territory. And these guys do this, one, with that sound, and two, with the bulk of their bodies. Male wool carder bees are over a centimeter, about 17 millimeters long, which is almost 2 centimeters, which is good size. We're talking almost the size of a small bumblebee. And they use that bulk to, as they're cruising around, they will physically bump into other bees and jostle them and try to keep them away from what they have decided is their territory. And while they're doing it, they're making this really continuing sound that to me sounds like a distant chainsaw. So keep your ears open. If you happen to have fuzzy plants in your yard, and by the way, this species that I've been seeing in my yard, the lamb's ear is a non-native, it's a European species. And so what I'm seeing is the non-native or European wool carder bee. There are some native carder bees too. They all have this tendency or habit of collecting wool from plants and using that to provision or create their nests, as we'll see in just a couple of slides. Now, that name wool carder, wool cards, as you may or may not have seen in use. I know we've got a pair of these that have been floating around my mom's side of the family for generations, back in the days when great-great-grandma used to spin wool. They would card the wool. The idea is to get the strands of the wool growing, being pulled in the same direction. So then when you spin it, you don't have a bunch of blobs as it goes through your spinning wheel. But bees, they don't card, they're not worried about the strands being oriented in the same direction. What they're after is the plant wool itself. Now, here we've got pictures of the male on the left, which I said, guard the territory. And as such, he is noticeably larger than the female who's there on the right. Her job is to go around to the flowers. She's not just gathering the plant fibers, the plant wool to create the nest. She's also after pollen and nectar, because that is what's going to nourish the larvae that she'll be depositing in those chambers. So here's what we're talking about here. Here on the left, we see a female wool carder working the surface of a lamb's ear leaf, and she's collecting these tiny little fibers, which she'll then take to a, sometimes around here, it's underneath or between the pieces of siding on a house. They'll also go into tubular structures. They'll use bee houses, if you happen to have those in your yard, those, you know, when you put plant stems in a container and you let the bees build their homes inside there. This habit or behavior is a trait of the Megachilidae. But as it turns out, we're going to get to them in a minute, but if we continue to focus on the wool carder bee, there was a really cool study I came across where the researchers found that it wasn't just the fibers from the plant that these bees were after, but the females also collect, and we can see it over here in photo A here on the left. This is a female wool carder bee, and you can see she's, that's actually, probably can't see, I had to look it up as I was reading. Pelargonium is the flower that she's on. Pelargonium is another word for the hothouse geraniums, not the wild geraniums that we see around here, the cranesbill geraniums, but these are the geraniums that are sold as annuals in our greenhouses. Well, it turns out there's some chemicals that are produced by those flowers and many others. The researchers just used pelargonium because it was easy to grow and it was convenient, but the female will actually go and collect these chemicals that give her nest protection from parasitic wasps. Here in photo B, she's down applying those little bits to the wool, and then in photo C, you can see those flecks of orange. That is, it's kind of wasp repellent, and it helps keep her nests free of parasitism. Parasites, or parasitoids, I should say, parasitoids are, well, they're parasites, but they kill their host. And it's very, very common. Wasps, we see it in a lot of different insects where wasps will lay their eggs either on the larvae, well, yeah, actually, I think it is usually on the larvae of an insect species. And then the wasp larva grows up inside that other insect, kind of eating it from the inside out and therefore killing it. And then the wasp pupates and flies away and starts that parasitoid cycle all over again. Well, in photo D here, the researchers were X-ray images of the wool carder bee developing larvae, and in the third cell over where that little black arrow is, you can see it's not developing the same way that those other three are. That one, a parasite, wasp parasite did get in there, and that larvae did not develop. But it's kind of a cool story behind the story for wool carder bees. It's not just the plant wool, but there's plant chemicals too that are helping to protect. And you'll notice that this article appeared in Frontiers in Ecology and Evolution in the February 2015 issue. But what they talked about more in that article is how how bees have evolved over time, and many different species have come up with many different strategies to outsmart some of their the predators and parasites that plague them. So it's a really interesting article. I found it through ResearchGate, but again, if you look it up. I wasn't looking specifically for it. I was actually just looking to learn a little bit more about the ecology. I had no idea of this other side of the wool carder bee. So kind of cool. Make note of that title if you'd like to look it up. But there's just always, just when we think we know something, it turns out there's a whole lot more that we're just now learning about. Really cool. So I did want to expand just a little bit on the Megachilidae. They are one of the groups of bees that we have. Well, they're all over the country, but we have quite a few representatives in this area. Leafcutter bees and mason bees, of course, our carder bees. These are all members of this particular family. And you can see they're a little fuzzy on their bottoms. On the left here, we've got a leafcutter bee, and on the right, I'm sorry, on the right, we have a leafcutter bee. I'm not sure who we've got on the left. Might be another leafcutter. Anyway, look at where they're gathering pollen. It's not, you know, we're kind of used to seeing bumblebees and honeybees, and they're flying around, and they look like they're wearing jodhpurs when they've been busy collecting. They've got those big balls of pollen on the scopa, which are the pollen collecting structures that they have on their rear legs. Well, with the Megachilidae, they actually collect pollen on the underside of their abdomen. So in fact, a lot of them are quite hairy, and some of that pollen can end up getting on top of the bees as well. It's one way to identify at least members of this family. You might not get to genus or species, but if you see bees flying around and they look like like their pollen pockets have been blown out and it's all over their bodies, then you're probably looking at a member of this family. Now, the way this pollen, and depending on the type of pollen, like over here on the right, you can see it's a very bright yellow pollen. These bees also have another nickname. The members of the Megachilidae are also known as the Cheeto bees because of the way that pollen covers their bodies. So it's true of our leaf cutters and our masons. It's also true of our wool carder bees. So keep an eye out for them. You might see them, actually you might hear them in a garden near you. So we're going to move along now to some of these reader emails. And this one came in about a week and a half ago. This woman wrote that her name is Jackie, and she wrote that she had some iPhone photos of a butterfly that she'd never seen before. She's wondering if we could come up with an identification for it. I took the first photo yesterday afternoon when there were two on the fence. I've certainly never seen butterflies mating before. Should probably give you guys a heads up. Yes, there is a PG-13 photo coming up in a couple of slides. And the next two photos are from this morning. Let me show you those first. Here we go. On the left, we have the female, and on the right, we have the male. These are Promethea moths. And, you know, the column that runs in the newspaper is distributed through Shaw Media, and Shaw Media goes throughout northern Illinois. So a lot of times we'll get emails from people in the western part of the state, in the southeastern suburbs down in Will County, Channahon and Bourbonnais, and south down even in Grundy County. So I never quite know when someone writes if they don't specifically state. I don't know where they're writing from. So when I saw this Promethea moth, I wrote back and I said, Jackie, please tell me, where are you? Because here in Kane County, we kind of have the big three of giant silk moths. We have the Polyphemus, we have the Luna, and we have the Cecropia moths. And the Promethea doesn't really occur as far as I knew at the time. But what I've learned is that they do occur in Kane County because Jackie lives over by Nelson Lake Marsh, also known as Dick Young Forest Preserve. So this was on her fence. We've got, and you can kind of see over here on the left photo of the female, she's not alone. She is actually accompanied by the fellow that's pictured on the right. And yes, there was a little vodiodo going on right there. Now, what you see, you can see the male's dark wing behind the female. And then you can also see this large feather-like antenna. That's a kind of a quick way, if you're not familiar with the markings of a particular species, or if there's no difference in the markings between a male and a female, like I'm thinking of like the Polyphemus moth or the Luna moth or the Cecropia moth. The males and the females are very, very similar, but their antennae are very different because it's those antennae that let the male follow the pheromone trail to the female. So he needs to be sensing the chemicals that she's putting out, so his antennae are going to be larger than hers. So males on the right, the females on the left, and when they get together, they look like this. The notation that I found in Bug Guide I thought was kind of interesting too. It said that the females are known to fly to lights, but the males are not. Don't know why that is. Interesting little trick of evolution that maybe, I'm not even gonna conjecture why that would be, and maybe it will be disproven someday, but the moths are here in Kane County, and so please, if you happen to know of any, I would love to find out if there's more, because this was a new one for me. I'd heard of Promethea moths, had not ever seen one. Here I listed the different host plants. I underscored and made it in a different color than the spice bush plant because this moth is sometimes called the spice bush moth because of its propensity for laying eggs. But as you can see, it's not exclusive to that particular shrub. In fact, there's a very similar looking giant silk moth called a tulip tree moth that is a little bit more exclusive in where it lays its eggs. But as you can see here, the Promethea moth does lay its eggs on tulip trees too, in addition to all those other different types of plants. And I loved how at the end they said, yeah, buttonbush, magnolia, oh, and other trees too. So many, many hosts are available. It's a little bit of a mystery why we don't see more of them, at least over here in the eastern part of Kane County, or a little bit more urbanized. Now, if all goes well, these two, the female has probably actually laid her eggs and is dead by now, because these moths, as is true of all the giant silk moths, they don't live very long. You can see they've got nice thick abdomens, but it's not because of any feeding that they've done as an adult. They do all their feeding in this stage here, the larval or caterpillar stage. So in the upper left here, these are the early instar Promethea moth caterpillars. These are, I believe, an inch or less in size. As they grow, their appearance changes, and they do get pretty ornate as they get larger. They've got a couple of bells and a couple of whistles here. They've got these projections here. These are not, by the way, these are not cocoons of parasitoids, of parasitoid wasps. If you probably have seen this, if you garden and grow tomatoes, you get sphinx moth caterpillars that sometimes have similar looking structures coming from their bodies, but they're all white. Those would be cocoons of the braconid wasp that parasitizes those caterpillars. But on here, this is pure ornamentation. Might be some sort of a don't touch me kind of a deterrent, although I don't think these caterpillars carry any kind of toxin. I think it's just they get really big, and if they've got a few projections on them, maybe they've maybe that will deter a predator in and of itself, because those do look a little dangerous, don't they? But they eat and they eat and they eat as juveniles like this, because they're not going to be able to eat at all as adults. So they feed, they put on all these fat stores, and then as we get into fall, they produce a cocoon. And every image I saw online, this cocoon was hanging. So it's a leaf rolled up to and held together with silk. The pupa then will be inside of this cocoon, and it's be something neat to look for. Some of our other giant silk moths, like the Cecropia, they produce a very loose, it almost looks like a brown paper sack type of a cocoon. And then our Luna and our Polyphemus, I always have trouble telling their cocoons apart because they're an oval nugget that tends to fall down and stay on the forest floor. But again, I've never found a Promethea moth or Promethea moth cocoon. So I can't say 100% across the board, but the images I was looking at online, all of them, this stayed attached to the plant for development. So keep your eyes out for those. If you see over this winter time, if you see leaf rolled up, it's turned brown, it's held together with silk, it might be harboring a soon-to-be Promethea moth. Kind of cool. So this next one, this was actually not a reader email, it was a coworker text. This is from my buddy Tim, who's our park safety supervisor. He sent it around noon on Monday, but he actually made this recording the night before, Sunday night. It was about 11:15. And I got to tell you, Tim has worked here at the Park District for many, many years, and he has seen and heard pretty much anything that can happen in one of our parks. So when Timmy sends me a text that says, "What is this? I've never heard it before," I want to pay attention and see if I can figure it out. So I want you to do the same. Let me make sure the volume is up on this and give this a listen. Play it one more time. See if you can hear it. All right, well, those of you who are frog monitors probably recognized that sound. That's the call of a gray tree frog. And by the way, gray tree frogs are named for their gray phase, but they can also be quite green, depending on just whether they're excited or agitated. Sometimes it's a form of camouflage. We oftentimes will see these guys in their green phase or form sitting on burdock leaves or sometimes prairie dock leaves. Anyway, as I was putting the slideshow together this morning, I put that video into the slide and I listened to it again. And I thought, what kind of gray tree frog is it? Again, if you're a frog monitor, this is old news. If you're not a frog monitor, though, this is one of the things that just makes our local nature so cool. We actually, in the greater Chicagoland area, have two different types of gray tree frogs. On the left is the, well, actually, I don't know. I just kind of randomly assigned these labels. I don't know which one is which. There's Cope's gray and there's Eastern gray. They are absolutely 100% identical from the outside. You actually have to do a genetic analysis to figure out which one is which. If you're not a scientist, if you don't have access to genetic analysis, you can also just listen to their calls. The Cope's gray tree frog has always been described as kind of a harsh buzzing sound, and the Eastern gray tree frog's call has been described as a more melodic sort of a song. Now, in listening to that recording of what Tim sent, I thought, you know, it doesn't sound like a Cope's. It kind of sounds like an Eastern. So I sent that recording into Allison Sacerdote-Velat. She is the she's the coordinator of the whole frog monitoring network throughout the Chicago wilderness area. And Allison, I've sent her a few other things over the years, and she's pretty fast with her response. And anytime I thought we found something cool, it turns out, no, it was just, an anomaly, and it was just something that was to be expected. It was just an unusual individual in a particular species. But in this case, I get this response back. That's a tough one, she said. It sounds like it's at the edge of being a fast calling warm night eastern or a slow calling copse. And slow would indicate a cooler night temperature. She said, based on geography, I would agree with copse, but to be sure, I will try to convert the file to a wave format and look at the spectrogram. A copse call is reached at 15,000 hertz, while the eastern reaches only 7,000 hertz. This helps me to confirm these tricky guys. In general, the Fox River watershed has copse, and we've been getting them in DeKalb County along the Kish the last few years. I did have a Winnebago co-monitor send a recording from the site with both species this season. With this year's drought, people are finding both species in more sites than usual. I think they're searching for water in early June, so they are turning up in sites we haven't detected them in past years. So where Tim made that recording was at Mini Golf, Riverview Mini Golf, which is over at Potawatomi Park. It's kind of it's not bad habitat for tree frogs. Other than that, we've never heard any tree frogs there before. So I suspect this probably is a copse, which is what we identified it when Tim first sent it in. That's what I was thinking it was, but it wasn't until I started listening to it again that I thought, I just went to copse because that's our default species here. So I will keep you guys posted. If it does turn out to be an eastern, that's a first, and that would be really, really interesting. But we won't know until Allison runs her analysis. But it always pays to kind of take a second look, give a second listen, because even the experts sometimes have to double check, and you never know what you might find. So again, I'll keep you posted on that. Tim has already asked if it's something really rare, if he can have it named after him. So he's kind of hoping for option C, a brand new species. I'll definitely let you know if that's the case. So as I was going through, I was listening to different recordings from different areas of what the eastern and the copse gray tree frogs sound like. Now, I've always learned these two species as Hyla for the genus, and then Chrysosceles or versicolor for the species. But Hyla, it's just always been Hyla. Hyla is the genus. Well, all of a sudden I start seeing this Dryophytes. And I'm like, what the heck is this? Turns out, as taxonomists so often do, there's people that are always looking, we call the taxonomists the lumpers or the splitters. There's those that want to kind of lump everything together into fewer categories, and there's splitters that want to kind of tease everything apart. And we tend to be seeing more and more splitters as we get to know these different species more and more, the different genera, everything that goes into identifying creatures. We're getting to know them on finer and finer levels. And again, going back to that genetic analysis, we're finding out that there's some relationships that weren't obvious earlier. And what we've got now is we've got a split of the splitters, because there are still taxonomists who are adhering to Hyla, and there are others who are making the switch to Dryophytes. The amphibian species of the world, which is one group, follows this new nomenclature, but the Society for the Study of Amphibians and Reptiles have stuck with Hyla. So could be some breaking news on that front too. But if you happen to see Dryophytes chrysosceles or Dryophytes versicolor, It's just that whatever publication or website you're looking at is choosing to follow this other way of naming things. But just kind of always gets me a little grumpy when I finally get the name down, then they go and change it. But it happens all the time. I guess I got to get used to it. So here's another email. This one came in actually, I believe it was just over the weekend. It's fairly recent. And I've been puzzling over it though, because I had a gut instinct and then I reneged on that. And that always makes me a little nervous. So I thought, well, let's see what the good-natured folks see. This email says from a gentleman named Jim. He said that his daughter saw a strange acting chipmunk on her front walk. And while it was entertaining, she wondered if it was perhaps suffering from something, maybe rabies. So he sent it in, and now I'm going to send it over to you. And we're going to watch this little critter. I want to see what you think. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Okay, are you getting any general impressions? Watch how it moves. And granted, it is moving kind of strangely. A lot of tail chasing. Gets a little dizzy here. I think we're just about to the end. Oh, no, more tail chasing. What in the world is going on? And one more spin, two more spins. Oh, there's way more chasing than I remember. So at this point, it's not so much entertaining as it is concerning. Wouldn't you agree? As I watched this video, I was looking at the markings. I was looking at that tail. I was also looking at the general posture or outline of the thing, of this creature. See how it's white underneath? It's got a white chin. It's got this long tail behind it. And again, it's not, the lighting isn't, so, you know, the images themselves are not super clear. It's hard to see if there's any markings on that dark fur on its back. Well, all right, we don't need to watch it spin anymore. I isolated this grainy photo. I looked at it, I looked at that white chin and that white belly, and I thought, you know, that's ruling out my first impression, which was a 13-line ground squirrel. They do have, some individuals might have a lighter underbelly, but the marking just isn't that sharp or as well defined. But you can see how they carry their tail. A chipmunk holds its tail up more. You can see this animal held its tail down. It's got that big hump on the back. I don't know, guys, but I'm kind of wondering if we were looking at a young long-tailed weasel. Remember, we've talked about these guys a few times now. They seem to be popping up in different areas. This is another to be determined segment. I've asked the gentleman to ask his daughter if she's seen any signs of weasels in her yard. You might remember last year, it was, I believe in June of last year, there was a weasel spotted in a yard in Mill Creek. And that fellow who reported that, his name was Neil. Neil described the scene of the weasel's area of its burrow as carnage. There were bits and pieces, there were feathers, there was fur, there was bones, there was little chunks of vole and rabbit everywhere. He wasn't a big fan of having the weasel in his yard. I don't know for sure if that's what this is or not. And if any of you have any ideas, I would really appreciate hearing from you there in the comments, in the chat section, because It's an interesting video. And now, does the animal have, I mean, is that normal behavior? I don't think so, but if being on a sidewalk isn't a normal place for most of our wildlife. And if it's a youngster, it could be disoriented. Tail chasing, that's a behavior. Some dogs with high prey drive chase their tail a lot. Weasels definitely have a high prey drive. I don't know, but again, I would love your opinions on this, and I will let you know what this family thinks of the weasel or ground squirrel hypotheses. So this is another email. Why are there so many daddy longlegs crouching on my wild black raspberries? I don't see any mites or a potential food or even honeydew, which is the excretions that aphids will drop. Lots of things will gather or slurp up that sweet liquid that comes out of aphids. She said that it pays to watch when I pick them. So here's the photo that accompanied this particular question. And you can see there's two in this photo. There were many, many more. These two appear to be on the dried out and less attractive raspberries, but she said they were really all over the plants. And this, by the way, this email came in at a time when we had some very high heat and we hadn't had a lot of rain yet. So my first thought was, well, maybe they are gathering rain. Maybe it's a good place to hang out. And I thought, well, why would raspberries be better than other places to hang out? There's certainly lots of places to hang out to slurp up raindrops or dew. And there's also, if they were looking to get out of the heat and into shade, there's certainly lots of options besides raspberries. But these arachnids definitely were favoring the raspberries for some reason. Again, this is just all kind of guesswork, but there's a lot of little tiny things that live in berries. I think about this as I'm eating them all the time. There's little larvae that are in there. There's little mites that are in there. There's little tiny things called thrips that sometimes are on our raspberries. I'm kind of wondering if maybe there was something living in these raspberries, something that were so very, very tiny that we couldn't actually see. So I sent this woman, her name is Sarah, I sent her kind of a step-by-step test that I had found. It was on a web page that was for fruit growers, and it was how to create a salt solution. You put, I think it's a half a cup of salt in a gallon of water, and then you soak your berries. And if you start seeing things crawling out, there were directions then on how to identify the two-spotted fruit fly larva, which is what that site was dedicated towards. But I thought, well, maybe it would work on Sarah's raspberries too. So she went for it. She said, sure, I'll give it a try. So she went and picked a bunch of raspberries and she soaked them. She was careful to leave the daddy longlegs back in the berry patch, but she did find a number of things that, I know those look like little seeds, but they're not. They're little organisms of some sort. So we're thinking that maybe the daddy longlegs, which are classified as predators, although they scavenge too, and they sometimes do eat vegetable matter, but we think that maybe that's what the attraction was. My friend Peggy and I have a saying that nature isn't random, that when you see a animal doing something, if you see a group of animals doing something, there's usually a reason behind it. And again, I can't say for sure if this was the case, but it does appear that there were tiny little organisms in those raspberries, and that could very well be what those daddy longlegs were going after. Now, I spent this morning with the summer camp kids from our Potawatomi day camps, and I was reminded that there's an awful lot of people that are walking around out there and they think that daddy longlegs are the most venomous creatures in the world. And the only reason we haven't all died is because they don't have the sort of fangs that can pierce human skin. Well, I had to crush all the dreams of all the kids that were out there today hoping to find these highly venomous and surely dangerous creatures. And I told them they don't have any venom. They have no venom glands. They have no silk glands because they are not spiders. The order is called Opiliones. I thought the etymology here was kind of interesting. They comes from the Latin word for shepherd. In some areas, these are called shepherd spiders. You might have also heard them referred to as harvestmen. Well, in other areas, sometimes they're called harvest spiders, but again, they're not spiders. Spiders have two distinct body parts. And while these guys have two body parts as well, they're fused together so it looks like one. You see a similar arrangement with mites. So there's this one kind of megaplex of two body parts fused together with the 8 legs coming out from there. I found these, I used to see these when I worked at Red Oak. We would get a lot of daddy longlegs foraging on what's left over in a spider web. And I was always amazed at how they could pick their way through a spider web and not get tangled up themselves in the silk, but they appeared to be scavenging on the dead bodies that the spiders left behind. One big way that these guys differ, well, one of many big ways these guys differ from spiders is that they don't have to just consume liquids. They can actually pull off and swallow chunks of food. You can see that, and I have not done this yet, but you can bet I'm going to try. You can see it in their droppings because you'll find bits of exoskeleton. You don't see that in spider droppings. You may have done the daddy longlegs, show me where the cows are. That was something my grandma taught me years ago because they have a habit of holding up one leg. Well, they can actually let go of one of those legs as a defense. The leg will continue to twitch, so the predator, usually a bird, will be holding this twitching thing thinking, I've got myself a meal, when in fact all they're holding is the one leg, and the daddy longlegs has scurried away on its remaining 7 or so legs. There was a study done in Louisiana on this behavior to see how successful it was, and they found that most of the spiders, most of the daddy longlegs that they collected that had fewer than 8 legs had 7. And there were a very small percentage of their sample that had fewer than 6. So they'll do it a time or two, but they probably don't want to keep doing it because that's definitely going to affect their ability to run away, which might be all they have left in terms of defense once they shed that leg. So anyway, just to clear that up, they are arachnids, but they are not spiders. So wish I had some blues music I could play here. I mentioned a few weeks ago how I do not have any milkweed in my front yard this year. I had a nice stand for several years, but last year it just started looking kind of peaked. Wasn't blooming. The leaves were looking kind of anemic and yellow. Well, it turns out I didn't have the milkweed blues. Da-da-da-da. I had the milkweed yellows. And Joy, I've got to thank you for this. This is a bacterial condition that our milkweeds, it appears to just be the common milkweed, but don't quote me on that. That's where the species I had in my yard that I lost. I've also seen references stating that it did not affect the butterfly weed, the tuberosa. So, but what happens is this bacteria was spread by leaf hoppers, and they probably feed on an infected plant and then they transmit it to another plant. Leaf hoppers have a piercing and sucking mouth part. And so they probably jab it into one and then jab it into another, and they transmit the disease. If you notice this on your plants and you don't want it to spread to other plants, it's best to remove everything, including the roots, and don't toss it aside. Don't put it in the compost. If you can burn it, that's probably best, or bag it and dispose of it so it doesn't get put in to any mulch making operations. Is the bacteria will continue to grow and spread if it's not killed. It is specific to the plant, so anything that happened to be feeding on it wouldn't get sick, like monarch caterpillars, or anything else that feeds on milkweed. But to tell you the truth, once my milkweed plants started looking like this, I didn't see a whole lot of activity on them, and they didn't bloom. So again, if you're seeing this, it's best to remove it. It's called milkweed yellows. And again, Joy, thank you so much for sending that information, because it solved the mystery to me, and I've been sharing it with other people too who said that their milkweed hasn't been looking so healthy. So keep that in mind, try to stop the spread. So speaking of illness, this is a topic that we discussed briefly last week, and there was a released by WTTW just a few hours ago, iterating what IDNR said last week, that this report of sick birds appears to be east of us. It doesn't seem to be affecting, whatever is affecting those many, many sick birds to our east does not appear to be affecting the Illinois birds. And it does, IDNR didn't say this, but other sources have been saying it definitely seems to be following the same range as the periodical cicada emergence. So whether it's a pesticide usage or there's a fungus that was affecting some of those cicadas. They can't say for sure, but IDNR did want to remind everybody that keeping your bird feeders and your bird baths clean by sanitizing them with a 10% bleach solution. This is going to be good to do no matter whether, if there's a disease in the area or not. It's just, there's a lot of things that can be spread at a communal feeding spot like that. So keeping your feeders clean, it's always a good idea. And if there is a threat of illness, it's an essential idea. Now the IDNR post, which I don't know how many of you are on Facebook or follow them on Facebook, they did ask that if you are finding sick or dying birds to report them to your local conservation officer, your local district wildlife biologist. The difference there. The IDNR does have a number of wildlife biologist staff spread around the state, but I'll bet you not too many of you, Ms. Bonnie, you might know, but not too many of you know the name of your IDNR district wildlife biologist. Well, here's a look. I didn't put the whole map in, just figuring that we would be most interested in the top half of the state. But if you go to the IDNR Facebook post, you can follow the link and it will show you the whole map. But you can see how these the counties are divided up. It turns out that our district biologist for Kane County also is in charge of McHenry, or covers McHenry and Lake counties, and it is Stephanie Fitzsimons. So if you want to make a note of that, feel free. It's her name, Stephanie with an F, Fitzsimons at illinois.gov. The other district biologists are listed there as well. But again, might be something to keep handy should this dying bird phenomenon continue to grow. But just some information, a little bit of news I thought you could use. Now, with that, looking ahead to next week, I know I said we were going to be doing American toads, but I decided to hold off on them. That is the column that will be running this week in the enjoyment that they were able to derive once we finally got some rain. I still didn't get to solitary wasps. Every time I go to tackle this topic, I find out more information. So I put it on the docket again for next week because we just keep finding out more and more interesting things. So that'll be a really cool segment. I'll do some updates on the topics that we covered tonight that I don't have full answers on. And you never know what's going to happen over the course of the next week. So with that, I'll bring the screen share to an end, and we'll see here what we've got. All right. Uh-oh. I hope that the screen share worked. Looks like it did. And so Swedbergs, Greg and Kelly heard copes, tree frogs at timber trails and had never heard them before. So, okay, so that's an important note that they are sort of shifting. Again, that dry period that we've experienced earlier in the spring does have animals moving around. Now, a question for Allison I'll have is how do these things move around? How do they show up in an area where they've never been before? Because they're frogs, they don't fly. So definitely an interesting topic and one I want to learn more about too. And Diane was also monitoring, listening on Bolcom. And you had a frog with an unusual call and determined it was a copse. So congratulations. Yeah, it's such a thrill to hear these guys. The copes that I've heard, they always sound just a wee bit angry. It's kind of like, it's a forceful, and I believe the experts describe it as a harsher sort of a call. Very exciting. Yeah, the eastern is that's the frog call that to me sounds just a little bit like a red-bellied woodpecker. So, and that one that was calling at mini golf, my brain immediately went to great tree frog, and since we've only got copes here, that's what I went with. But we'll see what Allison has to say. Eating too many berries. Probably correct. I don't know, Kay, I'm wrong an awful lot around here. Bees or biting flies. Yeah, I'm not so sure it's a chipmunk. Yeah, they, lots of questions here. So, Wallace, I think you were talking about the, why for that behavior. It might have been fleas. Too, animals will be running around, if they're uncomfortable. And if it was a weasel, it was not a full-grown one. A least weasel is about the size. It's always hard to gauge size, but that was definitely a small animal. And it would look to me to be about the size of a least weasel, but a least weasel's tail is shorter than what was appearing on that animal. So we'll see, maybe they can get us more video too if this animal continues to appear. So yeah, I'm not so sure it's a chipmunk either. And, but again, we only know what we know. So if, you're only familiar with chipmunks, then if there's a little animal bouncing through your yard that's chipmunk size, you're gonna call it a chipmunk, even though you might learn later that it's not. So yeah, hopefully we get more information from that family. Beth has a great question. If a daddy longlegs loses a leg, does it grow it back? No. At that stage, they are, they would have to continue to molt and grow, and it's actually a mechanism or a process that they're able to just let it go with a small amount of fluid, it does not grow back because they don't have enough time to regenerate and go through another series of sheds to get it to grow back. That's a good question though. And then Martha, you want to know the extension for the biologist? Hang on a second, I'll bring that screen back up again. And we'll just go down here. We'll do the whole slideshow. We'll just go to that one slide. The biologist, the IDNR wildlife biologist for King County is Stephanie Fitzsimons, 815-675-2386, extension 215. All right. With that, does anybody have any questions or comments or things you've seen that you don't know what to make of? If not, hey, greatly appreciate you spending some time tonight. We've got all kinds of fun things to look forward to in this coming week. I wish you all the best, and I look forward to seeing you again next week. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Pam.
Thank you, Pam.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Pam.